Why Americans can't accept the good economic news. The economy is great. Why do Americans blame Biden? Americans are still better off with more in the bank than before the pandemic. And my personal favorite, should we believe Americans when they say the economy is bad? People are being gaslit about the economy and inflation. With headlines like these, can you blame people for being upset? Instead of saying that we don't know what we're talking about, maybe instead pundits should look to see if what's being measured is actually what matters to people. All right, so what's going on? Hi everyone, welcome. This is Clarity T. Thanks for stopping by. Please like, comment, and subscribe. All right, let's get into it. So first to start, when a lot of pundits are referencing sentiment that's occurring, a lot of them are referring to these U of M sentiment charts. This is some data that pundits or even economists, some economists are having trouble reconciling against economic data. So from this, we can see consumer sentiment is at all-time lows, even lower than recession periods like 2008, 2001, all the way back to the 80s. We can see now sentiment has been increasing, but still on the lower end. But things are definitely worse than 2019 from this high point. So I think it still makes sense that economic sentiment isn't that great. Some pundits might say, well, hold up. They'll say that inflation is down, inflation is cooling, we're in a period of disinflation, real wages are up, unemployment is at historic lows. What is the problem? What are we talking about? So there are a couple reasons for it. So I'm going to get one out the way where I'll agree and say, yeah, there is something here that's outside of economic day-to-day. So we can see definitely there is an increase of political polarization that's been occurring since 2020. Not really going to get into it, but very clear that there is political polarization that's occurring, and that is also feeding into consumer sentiment. Political spectrum aside, it's still clear that there's still something else going on. And one of those main things is that our consumers say that prices haven't kept up with wages. There are three things that we can point to. We can point to housing, we can point to food inflation, and we can also point to what I'll refer to as the American dream consumption basket, which pretty much wraps up everything all together. Okay, so let's start with housing because housing is expensive. That's where most of us are going to be spending our monies every month. And inflation for housing is fucked. And quite honestly, it's by design, but there's some unprecedented things. Favorite word of the past 4 years, things that have been happening. To understand why I'm going to say it's fucked, here is some context. So we know at the Fed, they are targeting their 2% inflation. And when they say inflation, the main measure that they're looking at is PCE. They also, they still will consider PI, but the main one is PCE. That is where they're targeting that 2% inflation. But if you look at the numbers for inflation for housing, you'll see these percentages and you'll think, no, housing has gone up way more than this. Inflation should be much higher. And yeah, you're right. And this is where the difference in the calculation comes in. So let's first start with PCE. PCE, that weights housing inflation much less than CPI. So if you look, actually, CPI inflation figures are much higher in 2022 than they typically are. And that is due to the fact that the inflation that is occurring within housing is being weighted much more heavily within CPI. So that's one thing right off the bat that we're seeing. But even when looking at CPI, that calculation is what's used in real wages. But even there, we have a problem. Even though it weights housing more heavily, CPI and both PCE in terms of the actual calculation, what they're doing is taking an owner equivalent rent approach to calculating owner occupied housing. And essentially, so this OER approach is designed to measure the change in the rental value of the owner occupied housing unit, the investment portion excluded. So in essence, OER measures the change in the amount a homeowner would pay in rent or earn from renting his or her home in a competitive market. So that right there is going to be one of your main problems with the inflation calculation for the housing segment. If you take a look at the data now, we can see that renting your home is actually a lot cheaper than buying a home right now. So a lot of this inflation we're seeing is being tucked away as, the investment value of the house. And so it's not taking into the cost of the true inflation that is occurring when you look at, Redfin or Zillow and you see these large increases. So I'm going to give an example. I buy a house. I don't put as much down. We have high prices right now. I look at my mortgage payment, and my mortgage payment is a lot higher than what I could actually rent out my house for. So my owner equivalent rent would be much lower than what my mortgage payment is. That's what's going to be happening for a lot of this calculation, is that because you're excluding this investment value and you're only including what things can rent for, you're actually hiding a lot of the inflation that's happening. So next I'm gonna go over food. Food inflation has been a really contentious topic. Yeah, so I don't know why they aren't seeing what we're seeing when we go to the grocery store. Americans on average spend 12% of their income on food, and the lowest 20th percentile, they spend actually 30% of their income on food. So that is a lot of money that is going towards food. And so, of course, lower income and anyone who, is doing their grocery shopping is going to notice increases in food. And as such, even though food inflation might be moderating now, we of course are not going to forget about all these huge increases that we've seen. Pundits will say like, oh look, the price of eggs have come down. It's like, okay, like I don't only like survive on eggs, I survive on other things. And we can see that overall from 2019 to 2023, food inflation has been about 25%. And so that's what we're comparing it to. Versus if it were 2% inflation, each year we would have been looking at 8% change over this time. But instead, with this like crazy food inflation we've had, it's been a 25% increase since 2019. So it doesn't really matter if food inflation over the last month was like 0.1%. That's not what I care about. That's not what any of us care about if it was 0.1% over the last month. We care about that the fact that it's been fucking 25% since 2019. And I don't know what's so hard to figure out about that. So yeah, I don't really see sentiment changing too much on that route until more time goes by with lower food inflation, people making more money, or prices coming down further, which I don't know. Yeah, so I think it's gonna be one of those things that just takes time at much lower inflation than we've been seeing, just to the fact that we've had freaking 25% inflation over the past 4 years. Pretty egregious. Like, I don't understand how you can straight face try and tell someone that food inflation is now down, and what are you talking about when it's up 25%? And probably like one of the most infuriating things too is pundits are saying like, well, the consumer is still buying. It's like, what do you want us to like not buy food? Is that supposed to be your option? So our last one, the optimal American dream consumption basket. So what I'm referring to here is the fact that even if our own lived inflation in terms of like what we spend our own money on hasn't increased as high as the inflation headline figures have been, we still see these price increases on things that are more expensive. We see that house that we wanted to get that was like $300,000 cheaper just 2 years ago, where we see ourselves putting off purchases, downgrading our home purchases. Same with a car. We see, increases in the car prices. So the same amount of money for cars doesn't get us as far. Same with food at the grocery store. Like maybe even if we do spend the same, but in order to do that, we're checking down from the name brand version. We still see the fact that our money isn't going as far as it used to. Even if we're spending the same amount of money, even if we can make it work, we are all cognizant because we are not dumb. We are not stupid. It's not that we are missing what's going on around us. And yeah, so we see that. And we look at our bank account. We look if they're increasing or decreasing. We see even if they're increasing that the money doesn't go as far as it once did. 15,000 saved in 2019 and I have 22,000 saved in 2023. What does that matter if buying a house is 40% more expensive on the price and twice as much on the payment with the increase in the price and the increase in the interest rates? So it's like, we're not dumb, and it's quite infuriating that they're trying to convince us that we are. And it's not all gloom and doom. Like I said, inflation really is moderating. It does look like the Fed is done with rate hikes for a while. Mortgage rates are coming down, so we are seeing some positive news, but seeing things go up 50% and then go down like 20%, it doesn't even out. So it's going to take a while in my opinion, for sentiment to increase. If you feel like you've been gaslit looking at all these articles, you're not alone. People either have an agenda or being willfully ignorant because the data is out there. Thanks for stopping by, and this is Clear Money Tea. Please like, comment, subscribe.